Good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to be with you virtually at the Autoimmune Community Summit. In this session, sponsored by EMD Serono, we'll be talking about navigating clinical trials and how to decide if one is right for you. So my name is Bridget Shapatal, and I'm a clinical research professional and founder of Hypothesis Haven Science Club, the first and only health leadership program for elementary school students that provides early exposure to life science careers and teaches kids how scientists discover, treat, and cure illnesses that harm people. I'll turn it over
Good,
to Shirley.
thank you, Bridget. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm super excited to be a part of the Autoimmune Community Summit for the second year in a row. It is truly an honor. My name is Sade Mallory. I serve as the Patient Outreach Coordinator for the Autoimmune Association. I'm also a lupus patient. So today, as a lupus patient, I'm going to be sharing some of my personal experiences and hopefully offer some insight through the few clinical trials that I've experienced so far. And Bridget, she's actually going to be sharing an overview of the clinical trials process, things to consider if you're thinking about joining a research study. So, Bridget, let me start with the obvious question. What is a clinical trial?
So basically, a clinical trial, or it's also known as clinical research, is a type of medical research that human volunteers take part in. So the whole aim of clinical research is to answer questions about a drug, a therapy, a device, or about the tests that are used to discover diseases.
Okay. So you talked about questions. What are some of the questions that researchers are trying to answer?
Well, the three main questions that are being asked in any clinical trial are number one, is the new therapy safe? Number two, does it work? And number three, is it better than something that we already have? So thousands of people take part in clinical trials each year, and without them, medical discoveries would not exist. Clinical trials play a pivotal role in testing new therapies, studying potential cures, and improving lives. And so that includes the lives of people who are living every day with autoimmune diseases. So if anybody listening out here has ever taken a medicine, had an x-ray, or had a surgery, you have benefited from clinical research.
Now, I know there are different types of research. I know one is observational because I believe those are the ones that I'm participating in. Can you expand on, are there different types of researches other than observational and explain what they are?
Yeah, sure. So there are two main kinds of research, like you mentioned. There's observational research, which is just what it sounds like. So the researchers are observing and they're collecting data on the natural progress of a disease. And then there's interventional research, which is probably what most people think of when they think of clinical trials. And that's when researchers are actually testing a new therapy or a new way to prevent or treat a disease on people.
Okay. And this is actually a question that I probably should have asked before I started my clinical trial, but how exactly are clinical trials organized?
Yeah, so I'm glad that you picked up on the fact that clinical trials are, in fact, organized. They are very regulated and a very organized process. But I kind of wanted to step back a step because before research can even take place in people, it actually has to first be tested in the lab over a long amount of time. Then it's tested in animals. Both of these are called the preclinical phase. And then once a new discovery looks promising enough or safe enough after those two steps, then it moves into at least four different parts that are called phases. And so just kind of for a quick overview, phases 1 through 3 of research start out with like a small number of healthy volunteers, and then they gradually increase to a larger number of people who are dealing with the disease. Phase 1 through 3 studies look through the safety of the drug that's being tested. That's the very first thing, or the therapy being tested. The next thing that they look at is, how well the therapy works. So the efficacy is what that's called. And then from there, they go out and they look at, what would be a potential dose or the right amount of the therapy to give to people. So phase 1 through 3 can take anywhere from 5 to 10 years because everything is done in a very detailed and in a very studied way. And after phase 3, that's when health agencies like the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, as most people are familiar with, will review all of that data, take a look at it. And if it looks as though things have gone well with the research and it seems like it's safe again, and that it might have a potential of working, that treatment is then approved for public use. And so that brings us to phase 4 of research, which is when the researchers continue to track how well that therapy is working in the real world among the broad public. But even though that's phase 4 of research, there's still data being collected. We're trying to look at any long-term side effects that might develop, 5, 10, 20 years out from when the drug is or the therapy is approved, just to kind of make sure that there's not any other surprises once people actually start using it in more wider use.
Oh, right. That's actually a lot of great information. I love how you break it down because it's extremely helpful for patients like myself. So, for those who are listening and are curious, how do they determine if a clinical trial is right for them?
Well, that's a really important thing. I mean, the decision of whether or not to join a clinical research study is a really personal one. It's one that should really be made only after careful consideration, finding out what's involved in the study, and then also after conversations with your rheumatologist, your study doctor, and then also with people that you trust.
Absolutely. And so, once they get in the process, are there particular questions that participants should have in mind to ask the study doctor?
Yeah, definitely. And if people have a pen or a pencil, something like that handy, you could kind of jot some of these down. I mean, really, the first thing to ask is why is this study being done, right? So basically, what is the question it will answer? You want to find out, is this study, potentially going to cure my condition, or is it something where maybe we're just providing relief for the symptoms? So you just really want to make sure that that's clear, so that you know first and foremost what to expect from the study. You would want to find out what kind of, therapy is being tested. How is it going to be given? Like, I'm very scared of needles. So, is it going to be an injection, or is it going to be a pill that I can take at home? You also want to find out who can be a part of the study. Every study has like entry rules of who can, if you have these criteria, be in the study, and who cannot if you have certain criteria. And that's all done from a safety perspective. But it's really important just to know, like, whether or not you actually qualify for the study that you want to be a part of. And then also you want to find out, of course, what procedures are going to be done on the study. Is it going to be, lab draws? Am I going to have to have a CT scan or an X-ray? Am I going to have to come in, for multiple doctor visits? You also want to find out, how long does this study last? And not only just how long you will be in the study, meaning you could be in the study for 6 months, a year, but how long does the actual overall study last? Is it going to be going on 5 years, 10 years? Because that can kind of impact on when, you might be able to get feedback on how the study worked in all of the people that were part of the study. And then the last one is just making sure that you know who to contact if you have questions or if you have any problems, if you do decide to become a part of the study.
Awesome. Those are great questions. I wrote a few down myself. Can you talk about? I know it's like the benefits and the risks. It can be a deciding factor for a lot of people on whether or not they're going to participate in a study. So, can you touch a little bit on the benefits and the risk?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, it's just like anything in life. There's benefits and risks to each thing. So, some of the potential benefits of being in a research study are early access to new potential treatments. A lot of the treatments that are in a research study are not yet available to the public. So, you would have early access to them. You would also be a part of contributing to medical discoveries. Like I mentioned, science cannot advance unless people take part in research. And so you would get to be a part of, maybe potentially finding a cure, even if not for yourself, but for maybe your children or your children's children. And then also, when you're part of a clinical research study, you are very closely monitored and get a lot more care than you normally would just, by going to your regular doctor. So some people could see that as a benefit. Um, but of course, we do have to mention the risk, because they do exist. And besides kind of the obvious risks, like maybe side effects from this treatment, because most medications do have a side effect. It may be that the time commitment is a risk. If you have a job where you really can't take a lot of time off, but the study says you have to come in 3 times a week or every week for several hours, you could miss time at work or miss time with your family. And then also, there is the possibility that this treatment might not work. And even if it does work, you might be in the arm of the study that is receiving just the standard of care drugs. So, what you could have just got from your regular rheumatologist versus the new treatment that is being studied. So, researchers are very careful to make sure that the benefits of research outweigh the risks, but it's important to realize that that does does not mean that there are no risks involved.
Yeah. And speaking of risk, what measures, if any, are in place to protect project research volunteers?
Yeah, well, that is a really good question because I'm sure that anybody can, just do a quick Google search and find out, about any number of things that have happened and gone awry where people have been mistreated in the past with research. And even current day, we see all kinds of stories on the news about different things that happen just in the healthcare settings themselves. But what's
Mhm.
important to know is that as a direct result of many of the unethical or the poor treatment that happened on past research studies is the reason why we actually have many of the safeguards that are currently put in place to protect people. So the very first thing to realize is that researchers have a duty to maximize the good of their research volunteers and minimize harm. And so what that looks like is that they can't just test to see what's going to happen. You have to actually have studied and have a belief based on prior research in the lab that this has the potential for actually helping people.
Mm.
And then there are protections for what are called vulnerable populations. And these are usually just, if you think about it, kind of like a child or maybe somebody with like, limited mental capacity who can't really make decisions for themselves. People like prisoners who, have their freedom limited. And basically those protections say that you can't just enroll these people in a clinical trial because they're convenient and they're able and they can't stand up for themselves. So there are
Mm.
rules in place that actually protect those people more than just the average protections that exist for anybody like you or me.
Right.
Another concept in research is a concept of justice, and what that is just making sure that clinical trials proactively try to enroll patients that reflect the populations who will use the study treatment. And that all populations have access to clinical trials, regardless of things like ethnicity, race, culture, gender, age. We just want to make sure that all of the people who would actually reflect the populations that, are affected by the disease have a chance to be a part of clinical trials that are trying to treat that disease. A very big concept in research also is informed consent. And what that basically means is before your permission is given, because you actually do have to give your permission to the research team before you can be in research. But before that can even happen, they are required to explain everything to you. So they must make sure that you know everything that's going to be required of you, everything that's going to be done to you. They have to explain all of that to you, and then you have to sign in writing before you can be a part of a research study. Any questions that you have, they can't rush you. They really have to take the time with you to, let you get answers to all the questions that you have. And then even if you decide to go ahead and sign up for a research study, a very big thing to realize is research is voluntary. So you could sign up today, come in for your first visit next week, and like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. And you're allowed to back out. They can't stop you. They can't force you. It's all voluntary. And so all of those protections that I just described have been put in place as a direct result of some of the really, terrible things that have happened in the past in research as a way to prevent them from happening again in the future.
Mm, those are really good points. I'm glad you touched on the voluntary piece. It's really important to note that clinical trials should always be voluntary. So if you come across a trial or study that requires mandatory participation after you sign forms, just run. As Bridget stated, you have the right to change your mind at any time, and this is after you've signed the consent forms. So, Bridget, I think you've answered all of my questions that I have.
Great. And they were really, really good questions. So now that we've gone over those, I kind of wanted to switch gears a little bit and find out from you about your experience as a volunteer in the clinical trial. Is that cool?
Absolutely.
Alrighty. So can you just kind of share with us, how did you find out about clinical trials and like what were your thoughts about them at that time?
Sure. So, a family friend who actually works at the NIH, which is the National Institute of Health, or yes, National Institute of Health, suggested that I look into their lupus trials. I had a little bit of knowledge regarding clinical trials, but not much. So I decided to do a quick Google search and came across the lupus related clinical trial that I'm currently involved in. And of course, I had been aware of some of the, I guess you can say, negative misconceptions surrounding clinical trials, such as it can be dangerous or your information will be misused, things like that. But it was something that I really wanted to see for myself.
Cool. And so you've just described all of those different things that were kind of going through your mind, but like, what was the thing that like really made you decide to take part in a clinical trial?
Yeah, sure. So the coordinator that I had a really good coordinator, and she explained everything in detail of what the study consisted of. And I felt comfortable. So I made a personal decision to participate for a few reasons. First is, although I love my rheumatologist, it's always good to have another set of eyes to view your medical history and records. It's almost like a free second opinion by a team of qualified doctors. Secondly, so according to the NIH, women, specifically women of color, are underrepresented in clinical trials. And which is crazy because studies also show that African American women are 3 times more likely to get lupus than white women, according to the CDC Center for Disease. So, as a patient and a woman of color, my goal is to be transparent about my experiences, to hopefully encourage others to explore participating in a clinical trial, because I believe women of color need to be represented in the numbers while treatments are being developed. And the last thing is, most importantly, we do not have a cure for lupus. We don't have a cure for any autoimmune disease. So if I can contribute in any way, shape, or form to bring us closer to a cure, then that's what I'm going to do.
Great. And I'm glad you brought up that point about representation, because even though people of color make up certain populations, certain percentages of the US population, so for example, Black people make up about 13% of the US population, Hispanic people make up about 19% of the population. When it comes to how much they participate in clinical trials, the percentage of Black people participating is about 5%,
Wow.
and for Hispanic people or Latino people, it is only 10%. And that is a problem because, like you mentioned, a lot of these diseases actually impact people of color more, but we'll never really be able to tell how those treatments would work on those populations if they're not involved during the process of creating them. And,
Absolutely.
yeah. And so can you kind of describe for us what happens on the studies that you're on?
Sure. So it started off with I had to send all of my medical records over to NIH. They wanted everything from every doctor since being diagnosed. And after they determined my eligibility, I had an appointment with a team in Bethesda. They did blood work, EKG, chest x-ray, and then I met with their rheumatologist for over an hour. I mean, he went through every piece of my medical history. And then after that, they made current recommendations. And I loved how they also sent the results and the recommendations to my current rheumatologist or my nephrologist. So everyone is on the same page. I'm also involved in another study that follows lupus patients who either had COVID-19 or have the COVID-19 vaccine. And it was pretty much the same process. I only go in once a year. As I mentioned earlier, there are observational studies, and it takes about 5 hours of my day. And for the last one, it was like a small stipend. So some of the trials do offer stipends. Obviously, it depends on the study. But I just wanted to touch on something really quickly. I know we have about 5 minutes left. For the clinical trials, you don't have to have health insurance. And I'm mentioning this because a lot of us don't have adequate access to healthcare or access to healthcare in general. And so typically the sponsor of the study covers all associated costs. So I just wanted to note that. We're at 1:40. So, okay, we are close to wrapping up. This was truly an insightful conversation. Bridget, thank you. You are definitely the go-to person for clinical trials. Don't be surprised if I call you in a couple months with a few questions. um, but again, thank you. My name is Sade Mallory. And as a patient, I always say that being in the autoimmune community is not easy, but it's always an honor to be among so many autoimmune warriors. So with that said, Bridget, can you close us out by one, telling us or telling those who may be interested in starting their journey with clinical trials how they can do so, and then also if anyone wants to reach out to you, how they can do so.
Definitely. Thank you, Shada. It's really kind of an honor to hear your story and also be able to share, a lot of this information that I know people want to ask directly with the community. So if you're wanting to find out more about how to find clinical trials that might be a good fit for you, I would definitely recommend go to autoimmune.org. You can look up the research tab, and then they also have a tab underneath there that says clinical trials, where they list several different websites you can go to. One of them that I think is really user-friendly is called researchmatch.org, but you can find all of this on the autoimmune.org page. And if anybody would like to reach out to me to answer any general questions about research, you can definitely reach me on all social platforms at ClinTrialsLady. Thank you so much. It's been really great speaking with everybody today.
Yes, thank you, Bridget. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Stay tuned. I know there's another amazing session coming up after ours.